Imagine Dragons were inescapable throughout the last decade. I don't think anyone would deny that. And they've accumulated millions of adoring fans worldwide. But the longer Imagine Dragons stuck around, the more negative opinions seemed to crop up. And it went far beyond your typical wave of backlash. Within the last few years especially, there's been numerous articles calling them the worst band ever, as well as other bands voicing their distaste for Imagine Dragons. There's even been jokes about them being the new Nickelback. You'll be hard-pressed to find a current mainstream band that gets the same level of hate.
Imagine Dragons has grown to become one of the most hated and disrespected bands of the decade.
But of course you've read the title, and yes, I'll be doing some defending of the band and their music. Why? Well, beyond liking their music, I find most of the criticisms they receive to be exaggerated, and sometimes just straight up inaccurate. Of course, everyone is entitled to their opinion, you don't have to agree with anything I say. I just thought I'd give my 2 cents and challenge the common criticisms they receive. Anyway, let's get into it. Point number 1. They're not even a rock band. This is a pretty common claim I've heard, that Imagine Dragons isn't even a rock band, and it's often said in a derogatory way, like it's some kind of knock against the band. Well, that's interesting, because you know who else would agree with that statement?
I think, we've always kind of prided ourselves on being kind of a genre-less band.
That's right, Imagine Dragons don't even consider themselves a rock band, so pointing out that they're not a rock band like it's some kind of knock against them is kinda silly. But this critique goes a step further. You see, a lot of people claim that them not being rock isn't the problem, but that they're often marketed as a rock band, that Billboard charts and radio stations will inaccurately categorize them as rock, and therefore Imagine Dragons is taking up space, airtime, and attention away from the actual rock bands. This was especially evident in light of Billboard's top rock songs of the decade, with Imagine Dragons taking up the top 3 spots.
What's going on here?
Okay, seems like a valid point, but like we established, Imagine Dragons never claimed to be a rock band, and have gone on record saying so. It's not like Imagine Dragons are these posers going around claiming to be a rock band. It's not the band's fault if Billboard or rock charts fail to categorize them properly. Yet, bizarrely enough, people still get angry at Imagine Dragons over this. Like I said, if you're not happy about Imagine Dragons taking up space on rock charts, that's understandable, but holding this against the band simply doesn't make sense. On a side note, just because Imagine Dragons isn't a straight up rock band doesn't mean their music is devoid of rock influence, because they definitely have some, and even a handful of hard rock tracks. It's not enough for them to be considered a rock band overall, but it's still worth bringing up. Maybe this is why they're often miscategorized, because their music's kinda tricky to categorize in the first place, especially since they take influence from a pretty wide array of genres. Speaking of which, point number 2. They are like so incredibly formulaic. Now let's delve more into the criticisms against the quality of their music. One of the most common notions I've heard is that they're formulaic, all their songs sound samey, follow a similar structure, etc. I mean, I can kind of understand this point. Yes, their songs often feature anthemic choruses, big boomy beats, dramatic vocals. Like most bands, they have a set of characteristics present in a good chunk of their music. But still, this isn't the full picture. If I had to describe Imagine Dragons' sound in one word, I'd go with variety. Whether it's pop, folk, EDM, hard rock, arena rock, indie rock, drum and bass, dubstep, pop punk, R&B, synth pop, hip hop. In other words, not much is off the table for the band. They also have a knack for blending these different genres and sounds in all kinds of unique and creative ways. Yet I hear so many people saying how all their songs sound the same, that they just keep making copies of Radioactive, and so on. So let's briefly look at a handful of songs that demonstrate their creativity, versatility, and all that good stuff. Cool Out is led by these lush, shimmery sounding retro synths. Around the 2-minute and 13-second mark, we get these tropical sounding guitar passages that almost sound reminiscent of the guitars in Yes's Long Distance Runaround. Dan's smooth, multi-layered vocals croon over the mix, and the whole thing sounds rather summery. Sure, it's nothing groundbreaking, but between the vibrant retro synths, tropical guitar passages, and laid-back summery atmosphere, yeah, it's a fairly unique and well-executed combination of ideas and aesthetics. Friction features a distinct guitar tone that almost sounds Egyptian or Middle Eastern influenced. The chorus features this odd buzzing sound. It's kind of tricky to pin down exactly what it is. It almost sounds like they sampled the sound of like an electrical current or something to that effect. This is also one of the more hard rock influenced tracks. As the song climaxes, it develops into a fairly heavy groove, as Dan vocally unleashes what sounds like battle cries. Once again, nothing groundbreaking, but it's still fairly creative and unique to Imagine Dragons. Bullet in a Gun is led by a dark, ominous synth that's downright sinister sounding. It's complemented by a glitchy, stuttering beat. The vocals are raw and urgent, and littered with these choppy, pitch-shifted effects. The whole thing sounds pretty out there, and even kinda has a lo-fi quality to it. Not to mention some very topical and self-aware lyrics that discuss mortality, the price of fame, selling out, mental illness, and it's all wrapped into one song. Okay, one more song and then we'll move on. The Fall is one of their more intricate songs. It opens with a minute-long instrumental passage that's filled with sweeping horns and sounds airy and almost whimsical in tone. Another noteworthy aspect is the chorus, which is surprisingly stripped back. Sure, the pre-chorus is fairly anthemic, but when the actual chorus hits, almost all the instruments are stripped away, and it's just Dan's vocals. It's kind of an unexpected turn for an Imagine Dragons song, and it's very effective. The song also features one of the most explosive climaxes in any of the band's songs. It's built up very gradually, but when it hits, it fires on all cylinders. It's full of great drum fills, church bells are going off, and it features a really unique vocoder, which makes Dan's voice sound slightly higher pitch and has this odd angelic quality to it. This is also one of their lengthier songs, clocking in at over 6 minutes. Yeah, this song is quite the opus. And that was only 4 examples, just a thin sliver of the band's vast discography. Honestly, it seems like most people who call them formulaic are only judging them based on a handful of singles, and even some of their big hits aren't as samey as people make them out to be. I've also heard some people complain that they rely on simple song structures, but I've never really understood this criticism. Imagine Dragons aside, most songs follow a relatively simple song structure. Some of the most beloved songs of all time follow a simple song structure. Plenty of out there experimental music still have pretty simple song structures. Unless you're talking about some multi-phase progressive song, most rock and pop music follows a relatively simple song structure. So I'm not sure what people are expecting on this front. Point number 3. They're so overplayed and sound like car commercial music. Whether it's the radio, movie trailers, car commercials, video game soundtracks, or your local Walmart, Imagine Dragons music has been played just about everywhere. And I get it, hearing a band you don't care for being played constantly can be annoying. But is this a fair criticism about the music itself? Think about any music that you'd consider great. If these songs happen to be overplayed, you might get tired of them more easily, but nothing about the music itself changes. But once again, this criticism goes a step further, because people will argue that their music's not just overplayed, but that it's specifically designed to fit movie trailers or car commercials. And there's some truth to this. There's a handful of Imagine Dragons songs that were written specifically for movie soundtracks, but this doesn't represent all or even most of their songs. Do some other songs fit in car commercials? Sure. But try picturing any of these songs in car commercials or action movie trailers. That's right, they wouldn't fit. Plus, you can make a similar case for a ton of other bands. There's plenty of Foo Fighters songs or Queen songs that would fit perfectly in a big action movie trailer. Plus, I've heard a ton of classic rock songs played way more often in car commercials than I have Imagine Dragons. Like I said, I can understand where people are coming from with this point, but not only does it not say much about the quality of their music, but once again, it feels like people are judging their music based on a handful of songs. Point number 4. The criticisms I agree with.
Bet you didn't expect it.
So this is the part of the video where I admit that Imagine Dragons isn't a perfect band. Shocking, I know. And while I think most of the critiques against them are unfair or exaggerated, there's still a few that I agree with. One of these criticisms being of their lyrics. Now don't get me wrong, I think the band is capable of writing some solid lyrics, especially in these songs. But typically, their lyrics are pretty vague and non-specific. I assume they're written this way to have a more universal appeal. In other words, the more general and all-encompassing the lyrics, the more people can relate and project their own situations onto the music. In theory, at least. But I'm not really on board with this mentality. It's partially why people make fun of those inspirational posters, because the messages on them are so vague and simplistic that they fail to be meaningful. And I'm not saying Imagine Dragons lyrics are equivalent to those inspirational posters, but the flaw stems from a similar ballpark. Now, for me, this isn't a huge deal, because I tend to focus more on the music itself, while the lyrics are more secondary. But this is still a consistent issue I've had with the band. And there's at least one other criticism I agree with. Their production. Another big criticism people have is that they're overproduced. Now, this isn't a big deal on their first 2 albums. While they're definitely more polished sounding than a lot of other pop and rock records, they still sound fairly organic. It isn't until their third album where I take issue. At this point, the more polished aspect of their sound got magnified. The production on Evolve sounds too sleek and touched up, to the point of sounding kinda sterile. Is it enough to ruin the album? No. But again, it's still something I take issue with. Their following album, Origins, suffers from a different production flaw. While Evolve sounded too polished, Origins sounds too messy. Because of the mixing, it creates moments that sound muddy, where it's tricky to make out what's going on with certain instruments. Take Boomerang, for example. When the chorus hits, there's a lot of cool things going on instrumentally, but due to the mixing, it makes these instruments tricky to make out. A lot of the finer details especially get buried in the mix. Again, it's not bad enough to ruin the music, and it doesn't apply to every song on Origins, but it's still a flaw that I take issue with. So yeah, those are the criticisms I find fair. Anyway, point number 5, conclusion. So with all things considered, do Imagine Dragons deserve all the hate and ridicule they've been receiving? Hell nah. To briefly summarize my main points. 1. They might not be a full-on rock band, but there's nothing wrong with that. They're well aware of it, they don't pretend to be, and any miscategorizing isn't their fault. 2. They're not nearly as formulaic or generic as people make them out to be, and are actually quite versatile and creative, especially when it comes to combining different genres and aesthetics. 3. While some of their music may be commercial, this isn't inherently a bad thing, and it's not fair to judge their entire discography based on a handful of songs. 4. They have flaws, and that's okay. Most bands aren't perfect. Now, I'm not saying you have to like Imagine Dragons. If you walk away from this video still thinking they're terrible or mediocre, that's fine. This was simply meant to showcase my opinion and challenge the common criticisms they receive, and hopefully encourage you to give Imagine Dragons a fair shake, especially before you jump on the whole worst band ever bandwagon. Anyway, thanks for watching. Give this video a like or a dislike, comment your thoughts, subscribe for more content, and that's all. Peace.
I mean, the thing is, I don't really think you can be the world's most hated band without simultaneously amassing a pretty large audience that loves you.